Come back to our conversation about the coronation. What sort should it be? Do we go for broke? Do we go as if we're broke? More of your calls on that in a moment. But consumers will be paying a fairer price for their electricity as the government today introduces new emergency powers. More on that now from Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg, who joins me. Mr. Rees-Mogg, I wonder if we can start, though, initially with some more grave affairs. Another season of disappointment for Somerset County Cricket Club. What's gone wrong there, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
Mr. Ferrari, yes, you ought to have George Parker of the Financial Times
Indeed.
on, who is a great political commentator, and he and I regularly talk about Somerset's affairs. I very much want us to win the county championship within my lifetime. We've got so close. We've come second a couple of times in recent years, and this year wasn't our best year ever. Beginning of the season, we either won by an innings or lost by an innings.
Right.
So we need to get more regularity next year, and perhaps next year will be the time we win.
I look forward to speaking to you on that. Now to other matters. We all know that the mini-budget was all about growth, and yet this morning, Secretary of State, you'll have seen the figures that the GDP has contracted by 0.3%. This comes at a time when the pound is under pressure, mortgage products are being pulled. The stewardship of the economy under this government is not particularly shrewd, is it?
Well, the figure that's just come out, the 0.3%, relates to August, before this government had taken over. And I think it shows the need for a package for growth, doesn't it? That if figures are coming out showing a contraction. Now, these figures, bear in mind, are very often revised. So a couple of days ago, the ANS produced revised figures for an earlier quarter where they said that there had been growth when previously they said there'd been a contraction.
You were a member of the previous government, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
No, absolutely. But what has happened is that following the policies that were followed to get us through the pandemic and the build-up of loose money since 2008, we have got the inflation that has been long predicted. Now, to deal with inflation, monetary policy has to tighten. And monetary policy goes against growth. It is essentially a contractionary effect. The government is quite rightly using fiscal policy to ameliorate this. And that's what the mini-budget was about.
But why is the pound taking such a kicking?
Oh, the pound is going down, as other currencies are, against the dollar, because the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates faster than other economies. And this is part of a pattern. So in 1994, emerging market currencies all fell against the dollar when interest rates were raised. In 1985, when the pound was at these sorts of levels, that again was because US base rates were higher than the other parts of the world, were rising faster. And the reason for this is that investing in the dollar is seen as the lowest risk investment. So if it is offering a better return than any other investment, than higher risk investments, then of course money floods into the dollar. But this is affecting the euro, it's affecting sterling, it's affecting emerging market currencies, it's affecting the yen.
If we stay in the United Kingdom, if we can, Secretary of State, we have the emergency measures put in place by the Governor of the Bank of England, allocating scores of billions of pounds. You aren't honestly expecting my listeners to believe the situation's under control, are you?
Well, actually, interventions have been taking place in other countries as well.
But if we restrict it to the United Kingdom, if we may...
It is a global issue, however. The whole inflationary issue is a global issue. It relates to quantitative easing going back 14, 15 years that was done for the financial crisis and then for COVID. It is an absolutely classic monetary expansion that is having an effect on prices, which is now being pulled back, and this is something affecting the world, compounded by the increase in energy prices, which is also affecting the world.
Secretary of State, when was the last time the Bank of England had to intervene with £65 billion worth of cash to prop up pensions?
Well, the pensions issue relates to pension funds in an environment of very low interest rates.
These are unprecedented emergency measures on your watch, you and your colleagues' watch.
The Bank of England takes measures that deal with circumstances as they arise.
These are unprecedented emergency measures. Now, whether you get there or not is another matter, but will you accept that we currently need unprecedented emergency measures?
Well, there are regularly interventions in markets when events happen. It is not abnormal for the Bank of England to do things when a particular event takes place that happens faster than is anticipated, or wasn't anticipated. And that's the problem with the pension funds issue, is that they were taking low probability, high risk investments. Now, there's an issue to be raised on the regulation of them and how they got into that state, but that is a consequence of rising gilt rates, which is a consequence of an independent Bank of England quite rightly raising interest rates and of interest rates globally rising. So this is part of the global phenomenon that the UK, along with other countries, is facing.
You might have been made aware that about half an hour ago, the Financial Times have reported that officials have indicated flexible approach if market volatility flares up concerning the Bank of England preparing to prolong the purchase of bonds. This despite Andrew Bailey, I remind my listeners, the governor, saying we have until Friday. Who's right?
Well, both those statements seem to be coming from the Bank of England. The Bank of England is
But they're rather contradictory, aren't they?
I'm afraid you must get Mr. Bailey onto your programme. I can't answer, nor should I answer, for the independent Bank of England, because that is such an important part of our financial setup.
How would you characterise Mr. Bailey's stewardship of the Bank of England over the previous 6 to 12 months?
Well, I've always been an admirer of Mr. Bailey. Dare I say, he's a lot better than his predecessor.
What is it that you admire about him? Many people say, quotes, he was asleep at the wheel. He should have acted sooner.
Well, Andrew Haldane, who was the Bank of England's chief economist, very distinguished figure and very interesting thinker. I think Andrew Haldane did sound the bell earlier than others, and he was at the Bank of England at the time. The reality is that the Bank of England is very much tied into the monetary policy of other central banks, that it doesn't necessarily have the ability to fly alone, so to speak. And in a way, it's the Federal Reserve that sets the pace, and it's been setting a faster pace in recent months. So we probably ought to have a discussion on the Federal Reserve.
Last week, the chief executive of Shell said there's almost a moral responsibility for that company to pay more in tax. And this is akin to what we've heard from his counterpart at BP, who say that in many ways they're like cash points. They can't get out of the way of the money. Are you still viscerally opposed to windfall taxes on these companies?
Well, if people want to pay more tax, they can. There's a fund you can pay into with the Treasury. So if Shell wants to pay more tax, if the chief executive of Shell wants to pay more tax, let him.
But why wouldn't the government encourage him so to do?
Well, because you have to set tax rates that encourage investment and are fair for the economy as a whole. And there are a number of producers in the North Sea who have taken on marginal fields that are not enormously profitable or weren't when they took them on, who are quite reasonably making profits from the investment risk that they've taken. Shell has a much lower investment risk because it's a bigger company, but I would say to any chief executive who wants to pay more tax, send a check in. They're free to do it. Rather than moralising about whether or not you should pay tax, you can actually do it.
But this, as we read, renewable power companies will have their revenues capped in England and Wales, as there's a pressure to curb what are called runaway profits, an announcement made last night. So if they're renewable, the government is prepared to take action.
Actually, what we've done with renewables is that there are two types of contract, to simplify. The new contracts have been done on a contract for difference, which provides much more investment security and much greater clarity of pricing. Older contracts are based on the gas price. Now, the government has intervened in the gas price at the retail market, not at the wholesale market. Had we intervened at the wholesale market, the price for renewables would have come down automatically. So we're merely transferring the intervention effectively from one market to the other to ensure that everyone's treated fairly. But crucially, this is being done in an orderly way to allow people on the older contracts to move to the contracts for difference, which will give them pricing security against a volatile gas price, which has been falling recently rather than from a high level, but has been very volatile recently, and this will provide greater certainty for revenue streams.
On other matters, as of course we're keen to try and limit or restrict energy supply, when you see the front page of a newspaper such as the Metro, and this is the National Grid's headquarters in Warwick, which has, I think, all but about 2 lights on through the night, burning all that power, how do you react, and what would your message be to companies and indeed individuals concerning this?
People have a responsibility, particularly when the government is providing a significant intervention to help them pay their energy bills, to use energy wisely. I confess that I have asked the office in Victoria Street for bays to ensure that lights that aren't needed are turned off. The building externally shows some lights on at night for the stairwells and fire exits, which you have to do. But that I think companies that are involved in energy probably want to lead by example.
Why didn't we go ahead with the £15 million public awareness campaign, Mr. Rees-Mogg? You were blocked by the Prime Minister, I read.
Well, I think that rather overstates it, that we've done a number of things, and there's online advice for households that the government provides. And a lot of this work has actually been done by newspapers, that lots of advice is available to individuals on how they can save money. I used to, in my previous role in the Cabinet Office, look at all the proposals from government for advertising budgets, and they were almost invariably trimmed back to make sure they were effective and a good use of
But you didn't even get yours off the ground,
funds.
Mr. Rees-Mogg. The Prime Minister didn't allow you to get yours off the ground at all,
Well, there already is advice coming from the government on household budgeting, so that's there, and the price signal is very strong. Prices have risen, even with the government's very significant intervention. So this is the normal sort of passage of government. It's quite rightly being done in this way.
Last couple of stories. The Times, a newspaper you know well, reports the Prime Minister has been forced to delay the start of Operation Rolling Thunder, blitz of pro-growth reforms, after failing to agree a deregulation plan with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Have you fallen out again?
No, not at all.
Is the Times wrong?
The Thunderer, not Rolling Thunder, but the Thunderer itself is a great paper of record, and you know my familial affection for the Times.
I do, so you're late for
But
we have wrong.
some big. Well, we've had some big deregulations we've announced already. So the definition of a smaller company is going from 250 employees to 500 employees. We've got the retained EU law bill, which looks at 2,500 retained EU laws and pushes towards deregulation. I think the issue with deregulation is that people seem to expect that there will be some big bang and some one exciting announcement. Actually, deregulation is all about dealing with a large number of small inconveniences that make businesses less effective or apply costs to consumers. And that's what we need to deal with.
And lastly, on effective business, how effective was your campaign in getting people back behind their desks at Whitehall? I read that you used to leave a sort of calling card saying, looking forward to see you back in place. How successful was that, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
It's getting better. Certainly, looking at my new department at Bays, there seem to be plenty of people in the office.
What percentage are you in business, energy and industrial strategy?
I don't have the latest figure.
Mr. Rees-Mogg, you are the champion of getting everyone behind their desks. And I think it's a fair question to ask you, what is the percentage of your own department? And you don't know. I can tell you the percentage of my team at LBC, and it's 100%. Mr. Rees-Mogg, why don't you know?
I think you're counting a slightly smaller number.
Very much so.
But Bays is looking much busier.
What are we at, 70%?
I don't want to guess at a figure. That it's better to give precise figures, and we're publishing figures, so that will come out. And it's important that we do, because people do need to be back at work, and we need to be people working.
Shouldn't you be counting it though, lastly, Mr. Rees-Mogg? You are a man of detail. Shouldn't you have percentages, at least for your own department?
Well, when I was in my previous role, I got weekly percentages across every department. And what I don't want to do is to give you a figure that I remember from 2 or 3 weeks ago. I want to be able to give you a precise figure. But these figures are being calculated, and they have been improving. There were endless excuses as to why it was exceptional this week, as you might imagine. It was too hot, it was too cold, it was Easter, it was a Jubilee, all sorts of things. I think we've now run out of excuses. And we need efficient and effective government, which requires people to be at their desks.
Always good having you on the show. Thank you for your time. Jacob Rees-Mogg is Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Late news headlines on LBC 5 after 8.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the pound has